All right. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I'm very excited to have 5 environmental activists here to celebrate Earth Day. Today, we have Shylin Black, a member of Sankofa Community Farm, located at Bartram's Garden. We have Steve Greenspan and Russell Hicks, who are both leading members of the Climate Justice and Jobs Team of Power, which stands for Pennsylvanians Organized to Witness, Empower, and Rebuild. And we also have Russell Zerbo, an advocate for the Clean Air Council. And last but not least, our amazing moderator of the discussion, Marie Nahikian, who's the host of The Usable Past, a podcast where activists share their stories of past and present organizing for better housing, food, banks, jobs, environmental, and social justice. So Marie worked with the US Housing and Urban Development under President Obama and has participated in building 5,000 affordable homes in Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and New York. She's also been a neighborhood, civil rights, housing, and labor organizer, a community journalist, and in 1977 was the founder of WPFW-FM Pacifica Radio in Washington, D.C. So now I'll turn things over to our host.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is such an amazing group of people to be talking with, but I think we're going to talk more present than past, but I wanted to share, and I'm going to share my screen right now. I wanted to share with everybody a little bit of history 51 years ago. And I'll see if I can do this correctly, which I don't always do, but I'll turn this into a slideshow. There was a beginning, and that was that in February of 1970, there was a college newspaper editors conference that brought together 300 or 400 of college newspaper editors from across the country. It was an event that I organized as a member of the US Student Press Association. And what's amazing is that 2.5 months later was Earth Day. But the College Editors Conference included Liberation News Service, who dumped sludge oil over the face of Robert O. Anderson from Atlantic Richfield Oil, and the hog farmers commune, who were provided the security. The Chicago 7 and 8, minus Bobby Seale, who was still in jail. Secretary of Interior Walter Hickel, who was confronted by Hopi Indians and who told him, "We just want you to know we are dying." Margaret Mead was the keynote speaker. So it's a little bit of history of how I came to be introduced to Earth Day, which happened 2.5 months later, and now we're in 1970 to 2021. So 51 years later, we're going to talk a little bit about what happened and what has happened and what needed to happen. I hope that one of our speakers, Shylin Black, who is with us, is a master gardener, and she's with the Sankofa Garden at Bartram's. And I wanted to share that from my very first visit with and meeting Shylin and my visit with the Sankofa Garden, I saw this group of young people who came together, and they plant, they clean, they weed, and they harvest this garden. But I knew there was something very different about the way these group of young people come together. And Shylin, can you share how you and your fellow gardeners start your workday every day? Shylin's still on mute. we'll ask her to unmute and we'll come back to that. The reason I share that is because the land that we live on has energy. It's alive and it has a soul. So I'd like to start out the afternoon by asking the great spirits to bless all of us who are here, and may we learn to heal Mother Earth. Many persons on Mother Earth exist and have experienced trauma, grief, and loss, some of which we have lived with over the past year, some many more years than that. So we ask that all souls have a safe place away from the painful pain of trauma and sad memories, and that we ask for the land to be blessed, and we bless the people who have taken care of it historically. And that's just the best way I know to start out a discussion in 2021. You got a brief introduction to who some of our panelists are, and I'd like to just start. We have two Russells, so we have to go Russell Hicks and Russell Zerbo. But I wanted to ask Russell Zerbo, just to start off, have you ever had like an environmental moment, one of those moments that you recall over and over and over again? Because you're an activist, you live environmental issues every day. I mean, do you have a moment like that that you can think of?
Like a good moment, you mean? Like a positive moment?
A moment that lives with you every day. I mean, for me,
Oh,
it was...
sure. I know exactly what you mean. Oh, that's a great question.
I mean, I'll just share briefly. For me, it was the Hopi Indians when they confronted Walter Hickel and said, "We want you to know we're dying." And that's something that I remember day after day of what all this is about. But how about you, Russell?
Well, I have a lot of negative experiences because so much of my job and my life in the last 9 years have been, it'll be August 1st, 2012 was my start date at Clean Air Council. So that'll be 9 years this coming August 1st. And the bulk of that job has been participating in public comment periods, receiving complaints from people. You know, nobody calls me because they're having a great day. I exclusively get phone calls from people who are furious about some sort of environmental issue that is either coming down the pike or happening right now. And then in certain situations, I will be the person that, you know, sees something being proposed and then has to take it to that community and go, do you know these people are proposing to burn chemical waste in your town? And there's, you know, a process for engaging with that. And probably one of my, and this is even, this was one of my big victories, but it also is the actual answer to your question. So I'm not just inserting it in there. This company, Elcon, was trying to build a very large hazardous waste boiler in southern Bucks County at the old US Steel complex, literally on the Delaware River, 20 miles north of Philadelphia. And they were proposing, you know, just to truck in lead and cadmium waste to be boiled along the Delaware. And it was just an absurd proposal. And when it was first being proposed, it was, you know, a 6-year campaign. During COVID, the company finally pulled the proposal. But, you know, 6-7 years ago, they were first in the community and talking about how great the facility would be and how all the benefits that would occur locally. And I remember being in the room with the gentleman who was proposing the project. It was like their lead chemist. And this guy was saying, well, you know, if you use nail polish, if you shampoo your hair, if you do any of these things, then you're responsible for this waste and you have to accept this chemical boiler coming into your community because you use shampoo. And then, you know, first of all, there's no lead and cadmium involved in shampoo, so I don't know where that's coming from. But the big thing is the person didn't realize that, you know, in southern Bucks County, they're already getting the waste from the mid-Atlantic. New York City, I mean, there's a part of southern Bucks County that has one of the larger aggregations of landfills in the country. So the person just had no idea that this community was already suffering an immense burden. So it was a really eye-opening thing, and I was kind of, my wheels started turning, and it's like, you really didn't do your research. And ever since then, companies are always making that pitch, if you do this, then you have to deal with this. But no one ever looks around at what the community is already dealing with. And unfortunately, in Eastern Pennsylvania, Southeast PA, we just bear the brunt of, a big chunk of the nation's waste.
We're gonna talk about that a lot more, because that's I think it was, and I'll go to you, Steve, next, about, do you have an environmental moment? Because I think you said yesterday that in Pennsylvania, we breathe pollution from everyone else. And that is a real eye-opener for any of us who live in the state of Pennsylvania. But what was your environmental moment, if you have one?
For me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in many ways, I'm a latecomer to activism. I was always supportive, but I think what really changed my attitude were two things. One, getting involved with Power in their climate justice and jobs team, and I did so because a number of things, including my work, convinced me that the two great crises of our time were social justice, racial justice, and the environment, climate change. And the second thing, the thing that really had a strong impact on me, even though I wasn't, central to its leadership, was Philly Thrive and what happened with the refinery. When the refinery exploded, it was a wake-up call. Getting involved with them, even just being a body, being a participant at the rallies, had a huge impact on me, because one, I saw the power of organizing, and I met people living in those communities. I worked with them, or at least talked to them greatly, and it made a huge impact, so that I saw that organizing can be successful. For many reasons, the plant did not reopen, but one major reason was the activities of Philly Thrive. And so that convinced me that I had to be part of this work and that I needed to learn a lot more.
That's a really important moment, I think, for a lot of people in Philadelphia. But what year was it that the explosion happened? So that was how many years ago?
2 years, yeah.
2 years. Okay. Welcome, Shailene. We're so glad to have you with us.
Hi.
I'm gonna come back. That's okay. I'm gonna come back to you because I want to zip over here to Russell Hicks.
Okay.
And ask Russell. Russell, do you have an environmental moment that kind of made you on a path that you've been on to not only be an activist but an entrepreneur?
Yes, totally. There are many moments of intersection and inspiration and inspection. I know 2016, I was co-chair with the Social Venture Institute conference that the Sustainable Business Network used to do annually and bringing people around the nation. And I remember hearing Van Jones speak about the green economy and how it could deliver the beloved community that had always been near and dear to my heart and mind via Dr. Martin Luther King's dream, and realizing that for all people. And really doing research and getting involved since 2006 in climate justice. I want to say Happy Earth Day to everyone as we honor Mother Earth. If we think about the earth as a mother, and it's close to Mother's Day, but it nurtures us naturally with all the rich nutrients we need to live, the sun, the wind, the water, but due to industry and man, we have to clean it up. And so I want to make sure that we acknowledge Mother Earth on the history, like you said before, to start with the land and honoring the land and the life that comes from it since the beginning of time. And so making sure that we all are aware and know that we have to take care of Mother Earth as it nurtures us, it nurtures life for all people. And so I'm glad to always to celebrate Earth Day 365. And in the last 3 years, in addition to the work with Steve and being co-chair with the Climate Justice and Jobs team with Power, is really educating local communities about what the green economy means to Black and Brown communities and diverse communities all around the city, state, country, and rural to be on one accord, one energy wavelength to sustain life on Earth. So there's many moments, and hopefully there'll be many moments to come in many years on Earth for all of us.
Absolutely.
So thank
I'm
you.
going to come back to you, Russell, in just a minute because I want to have a solar discussion with you, but I want to welcome Shailene. Shailene, we had kind of introduced you a little bit earlier, so I'm glad you're here. And I said that when I first met you and when I first visited the Sankofa farm, I knew there was something different. There were gardeners there and there were a lot of exciting things that happened, but there was something very different about the way the Sankofa farm at Bartram's Garden starts its day. And I was wondering if you would share with us how it is that you and your fellow gardeners start your workday when you're there to work on the farm.
Okay, so on a normal day for me and like my workers and everything there, we all get there on the same time around 3:30. That's when our workday starts. And we don't start directly by going in and working. Like we all welcome each other into the space and we talk about like how our day was. We have our little check-ins to make sure like everything's like, well, we're bringing the energy towards the environment in our space. Even if we weren't necessarily having a bad day, like the energy that we put in there kind of brings us up spiritually and mentally enough to be able to have a decent work day. And then like after we check in, we do our little like we choose our chores and then we like greet the land that we work to, like where the crops and everything are, where our plants are. We welcome ourselves into that space next once we start to work there. And then yeah, so it's more like a spiritual connection we have with our like the land. So we put it in our spiritual connection, an emotional connection with the plants and everything that we're growing in there. And then yeah, it really is very beneficial to, I feel like, the environment and to us as well. But
Thank you, because I think that's a very special connection that somehow in our busy lives of being activists that we often forget. So I thank everybody for trying to remember that. And as we move forward with talking about where we are today, I mean, I want to go back to Russell Hicks for a minute, because I know you've been involved with solar power. And I wanted to share with everyone that in 1985, 84, 85, there was a row, or there is a row of solar townhouses that were built for Black and Brown people who live there and own them in the 1500 block of West Thompson Street. Because I was involved with a nonprofit community development group called National Temple that built that row of solar townhouses. A local Philadelphia architect named Robert Campbell was the designer. The houses are still there. The solar still works. I don't know how many of the old original homeowners are still there, but it is amazing. And one of the footnotes to the story is one of the biggest struggles was getting HUD's FHA to agree to give mortgages to those families, because they were like, solar, what? You know, you must be crazy. Their electric bills for a long time were tracked, and the data was collected, and they generally ran not $1,000 a year for everything. And this was a row of solar townhouses. So how do you get people to talk and think about, and is solar an option in Philadelphia row houses?
It definitely is an option. I think there needs to be more renewable energy legislation, specifically around community solar in the state and the city, to allow more row homes to be equipped with ground source solar, rooftop solar, and even building microgrids to enhance the ability to have more community solar and ownership within community. Because
is it happening anywhere in any neighborhoods and communities that you're aware of?
It's happening in states in Jersey and tons of other states. In Pennsylvania, there's not legislation yet for community solar, which we are advocating and pushing for. Lobbyists probably don't want that, but the community does. We want even to look at combined systems of solar and geothermal energy, water and wind as a combined system of microgrids to electrify our public utility systems and to get up to date with our energy systems, to lower costs for consumers, to bring labor in the fold for living wage green jobs, and to save the planet, to sustain life on Earth. So solar has a big job to do, but it needs to take public sector support and private sector support. And just one story, attending the Solar Congress in Pennsylvania 2 years ago, this issue really thread communities across the state, red and blue. I know there was farmers looking to install solar on their farms as an additional source of revenue to put food on the table, but they also grow and produce and distribute food. But the same things in our local urban areas in terms of the rural need to have solar, but the only difference is that we're placing them on churches, large commercial buildings, and residential homes to energize our homes and to bring additional revenues into the household.
So if we're making a checklist, which could get very long, of key Pennsylvania issues, support for, I mean, what is needed? If I wanted to go put a solar, panel on my house, could I do that? Or do I need special legislation out of the state of Pennsylvania to do that? Or is the legislation geared toward the whole notion of production of energy?
Well, there right now is not legal to have community solar because it's on the state level, not.
I see. So that's a production, being able to produce alternative energy. You can't do it legally in Pennsylvania?
From a logistical standpoint, yes, you can. They have the capability to do it. We need the will and the legislation to do it. We definitely have the capability to install solar power around the city and state. There is innovation in battery life, and innovation in technology in regards to battery life, but they have the technology now to do it. And so again, the private sector has it, but the public sector has to catch up and meet the private sector in the middle to make it affordable for everybody to have access to renewable energy. And let me just make a distinction between alternative energy and renewable energy, and that we are talking about renewable energy being clean energy.
Okay.
clean and
But-
green.
So is there, and Steve or other Russell, anybody could chime in, is there legislation pending anywhere that has any hope?
Well, I
That,
mean, I don't know about any hope, but I just dropped it
That's-
in the community solar. I mean, community is an uphill. The Pennsylvania State Legislature is a nasty organization. It is. There is no other way to say it. It is a ugly, disgusting organization. And right now, I mean, community solar would just do so much. Because I mean, a lot of environmentalists don't like this when I say this, but you know, the home solar panel model leaves something to be desired. Because, you know, as a resident, I don't really want to manage panel. Like, I would much rather let a professional do that. And that's what community solar is. It's, you know, a professional gets to build the biggest solar farm that they can, and then I buy into that like a stock or something like that. So then as a resident, you know, I don't have to deal with the stuff on my roof, but I still get to buy into really large scale solar. And there really is, and I'll stop talking after this, but there is a, you know, there's a tech issue that needs to be broached with residential solar, and the idea of, you know, if I'm on my block and everybody has independent solar panels, that's a lot of resources. That's a lot of wiring. It's like, it would be better if we could all wire them together, which would be what community solar is.
Steve?
Yeah, I just want to add to that community solar also helps people who are renters, who are apartment dwellers, and that's important. It allows them to buy into and get the benefits of solar. There has been some recent court actions that suggest that the courts are not aligned with the legislature, but the legislature, as Russell Zerbo said, is clearly not in favor of it, and the
So
utilities
why?
have not really pushed it.
Is that
But-
because of utility lobbying? I mean, why is the legislature?
The
So,
ge-
I mean, other than the fact that they may say it's fake power, I don't know, but why are they so opposed?
Well, I think that it is against the interests of the Gas Association.
Okay, so now
I mean,
we're
there's some
down to
horrendous
the nitty
bills
gritty here.
in the
Huh?
state legislature right now. I mean, there are bills to defund DEP. There are bills to remove environmental permitting and to remove public comment. Like, you know, the Pennsylvania state legislature is trying to dismantle democracy in Pennsylvania. It's not just about community solar. I mean, it's not just about community solar.
Okay, so it's about environmental issues across the line.
I would say beyond environmental. I mean, they're just really nasty conservatives. Like there's, you know.
So
A good example.
are there good examples of communities that are effectively involved in impacting environmental justice issues? Is Philadelphia one of those communities? And if we are one of those communities, where is it happening? Is it happening because some of the big real estate folks decided to turn their lights off so that birds that were migrating wouldn't die by the thousands? Or is it happening because of the work that's going on around in Nicetown or in Chester? I mean, where are the things that are happening really seem to be making an impact? Because we clearly haven't changed the legislature, that's for sure. But is there a place to start with that? Steve, what do you think? Is there a place that it's happening in a good way?
So I won't say a good way, but a promising way. The Office of Sustainability that is in the mayor's office is leading, for example, a PGW diversification study. I think we could be more aggressive in it. I think we could be more aggressive in its goals, but it's in the right direction. PGW, which is municipally owned, on the other hand, is using ratepayer revenue to support the Gas Association, which is lobbying against those efforts. For example, even in building.
When you say ratepayer revenue, you mean what I pay PGW for gas? They are using some of those profits to lobby against solar power or to support the gas industry.
Well, not just solar power, even building codes that would make buildings more efficient and more capable of being fully electrified. They are seriously lobbying against that. In a recent code association meeting, the cities and our Office of Sustainability, for example, voted for codes that did encourage efficiency. And after they lost, and the cities won that vote. After that vote was taken, the Gas Association, which is supported by PGW, and PGW members attended this as well and voted against those building code updates. They approached the Code Association, and the Code Association actually overruled the vote of the cities, of its members.
So on one hand, you've got an Office of Sustainability going in one direction, and a municipally owned gas company that kind of doesn't follow the policy. Is that what's going on here?
That's what appears to be happening.
Yeah.
And it needs to be investigated more fully. I'm sorry, Russell.
Oh, no, it was just the city of Philadelphia had to fight to. There's a lot of preemption law. The state of Pennsylvania is always trying to stop Philly and other municipalities from, doing the right thing. So for a long time, there was a law. So for example, Philly can't have stricter gun laws than the state of Pennsylvania, which is, a huge problem. And it's led by the gun industry in Pennsylvania. Same thing with building codes. The city of Philadelphia had to fight tooth and nail to be able to update their own building codes outside of the state body, which is pretty much run by the construction industry. Pennsylvania skipped the 2012 international building codes, adopted the 2015 codes in 2018, and the city of Philadelphia successfully petitioned the state to allow them to adopt the 2018 codes, but it was a nasty battle.
So this kind of is an interesting jumping off point, because we're talking about a group of young people who are connecting with land at Bartram's Garden and the Sankofa Garden, where they're learning about the importance of taking care of the land and the spiritual connection of that. And then we began to think about what is going on today? What is it that redefines or defines who we are and what we're doing? Because it sounds like to me, when you start to talk about things like gun laws and building codes, and those were a lot of things that didn't used to be a part of an environmental discussion or an environmental justice discussion. So does that mean that the discussion is now so much broader? It's like when President Biden started to talk about infrastructure. So Russell Hicks, I see you shaking your head. Does that mean we're talking about a much larger conversation here?
Yes, it's all related. It's so many intersections in regards to environmental racism, environmental injustice, economic equality. It's all tied in. So when you talk about the infrastructure bill on the federal level, it has a lot to do with funding for parts of Green New Deal. It's just making sure again that we are progressively advocating in the middle to bring our two parties together to do something for the American people to prevent instances like Texas happening again. And so we have the PJM, Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland, who controls and distributes our energy up here. And that can easily happen here in either of those states. So to prevent that on the federal level, there's the infrastructure bill coming up that we need to advocate and make sure that there are equity measures in there, the environmental measures, and economic justice measures in the infrastructure bill, because it's all related to housing, food, access to land, and building local food systems with community and energy in order to really fuel all that. But we just want to advocate for that to be as clean and green as possible through renewable energy legislation.
Do you think you're seeing some bright lights out there working on this issue that could have an impact, Russell?
Well, yeah, right now I know in the Nicetown area, there's a federal lawsuit with the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and that's going to be a local / national issue that Germantown and Nicetown has been fighting for in coalition with Power and looking for, some results there. So monumental precedents in terms of legislation, but it's fighting for environmental justice in local neighborhoods, particularly around opening of this SEPTA power plant, which again affects the air quality, and the quality of life for its residents. Also, again, making sure that communities don't get cut out of the Green New Deal, just like they did the New Deal.
Right.
So that's kind of where we are now.
What though this says to me is that whether you're looking at things from a perspective of a connection through farming and producing of food or producing of solar power, that it really comes down to the fact that every phase of our life is one that's connected to some issue of environmental justice. I mean, Black Lives Matter is an environmental justice
Absolutely.
rubric. I mean, it's there, and that's what it's really about. The right to be able to exist in a safe neighborhood, as opposed to a neighborhood where you are policed instead of living in a safe neighborhood. That's an environmental issue. And that's a very big change from what I think any of us who were around in 1970 saw, because we talked about plastic bags and dumping and what did we do with solid waste and solar power, but no one made that connection to the broader issue of how is it that we live our lives and take care of each other as well as the land around us. And I think it's important that we begin to use a language that allows us to tie this stuff together. Shailene, you're very new to this issue. I mean, and was your introduction to environment the garden? Is that the first time you heard that word?
Well, yeah, actually, I wasn't really into learning, or at first I wasn't even interested in understanding about the land and everything until my sister, she got me into it because she used to work there. And then from there, she was telling me about it. And then once I got to work at the farm, I learned more about it. And yeah, it's just trying to improve my knowledge on the whole subject, and also trying to figure out what I can do to at least leave something, to be able to leave behind when I'm not even old enough, to be here anymore. So yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for taking that on. Thank you for all of us for taking it on. I have to pause for a minute because in the New York Times today, there was one of those other environmental moments that I wanted to share, and that is from our Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, who spoke yesterday at the International Finance event about the U.S. economy. and she called climate change, and this is a quote, an existential risk to our future economy and way of life. So I guess that's a change, even though in 1970, in December of 1970, does anyone remember what happened? Richard Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency. That all happened very rapidly in 1970, which, as we sit here in the state of Pennsylvania thinking that nothing will ever change, if there is a will and if there is leadership, I mean, EPA was created within months. Not that it's always been an easy road, or that EPA has not had to, move back and forth between a lot of influences. But has EPA been a good thing? Is it an important thing?
Yeah. And Marie, I would even say, and this is, I'll let Steve go. I just wanted to get this out really fast. Like, I've been complaining a lot about the state of Pennsylvania. That's why Philadelphia has its own environmental agency, Air Management Services. During that period in late 60s, before the EPA was created, hundreds of people were dying during pollution days in New York City, Philadelphia. And the state of Pennsylvania actually told the city of Philadelphia, if you don't create your own air quality agency, we're going to create one for you, and you're not going to like that very much. So that was how we got Philadelphia's Air Management Services.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. Steve, you wanted to add?
Just for your point, Mary, for many decades, for many years after the EPA was formed, the environment was a bipartisan issue. It was not highly polarized. Exxon did incredible work, research, at detailing the impact that the greenhouse gases were having on the environment in the late 70s and early 80s, I believe. They did outstanding scientific work. They understood what was happening, and then their management changed. The new management saw it as a threat. They canceled the research. They started to create, or at least as I understand it, so I'll say they allegedly started to create confusion about what was happening. And by 2000, it was no longer a bipartisan issue. It was polarized, and we see what's happened.
Is fossil fuel the source of all our ills right now? Is that the biggest source?
I think we need to distinguish between fossil fuels and the fossil fuel lobby.
Okay.
Yeah, the fossil fuels just stay in the ground. They don't have any opinions about anything.
It's the taking them out that is the problem, and our need to sell them.
Yes,
right?
an economy based on extraction. That's correct.
So during the pandemic, everybody said, "Oh, the call for oil went down. The call for fossil fuel went down because people weren't commuting or weren't driving or whatever." And we even began to hear noise that, Arab countries and the big oil producers were looking at how do we get rid of our dependency on oil production. Is that telling us something that, is there a change there, or is it just now back to the same old, same old? Prices have gone up, that's for sure.
I have a weird perspective because, there's this very patriotic, conservative American fossil fuel independence sort of idea that is
right
sweeping the nation. And it's so weird to me because everybody talks about energy independence, but then all these same companies want to then export fossil fuels. If you're not as whether you're buying or selling it to a different person, you're not being independent. So I always thought that was crazy. Like all of these conservatives that are talking about, energy independence are the same people that want to export everything. It's like, that's not energy independence.
Yeah. And so we're shipping oil through Center City, Philadelphia. Is that correct? Is it going right through Fiddler Square? I mean, that's what I keep hearing, that there's this impending disaster of oil being shipped right through the middle of Center City, and it's only a matter of time.
There was actually
is
a
that-
fire
is-
on CSX rail tracks in North Philly over the weekend. There was a brush fire because that same railroad company doesn't maintain their tracks. I think it was like 12th and Venango.
Right? So is that the same tracks that go through Center City that to get to South Philly, and they're trucking oil or bringing oil along those train lines? So no one thinks that's a big issue or one that we should be scared of?
Oh, I
That
think
is
we all think
about-
it's a big issue.
Yeah, we should be, because that
Oh, okay.
transportation brings pollution. That transportation industry bringing pollution through our city, not let alone the pipes, the infrastructure around pipes, and then to Russell's point, the sweeping the state in terms of, alternative energy and fracking and natural gas is still being promoted.
And could there be a spillage? Could there be an oil spill from, I guess, if there were a train accident?
There have been. I mean, it's the craziest thing. People don't realize that the Heinz Refuge is supposed to be this beautiful place. I go there all the time. That's a toxic waste site. The Heinz Refuge in Southwest Philly. And it had been like that for so long and had been known that. And then Sunoco had a pipeline spill there in 2009. And they didn't even have to do anything because it was already declared a toxic waste site. They just add them to the list. We already know there's 50 years of dumping here. Yeah, there have been all kind of spills and incidents. I mean, the refinery explosion, poured, I don't want to get the chemical wrong, hydrofluoric acid. Okay, good. I'm glad I got that.
So, okay.
We were very lucky in that explosion. It could have been, it was massive enough that those chemicals shot up far into the atmosphere. If it had been lower, it could have really affected the city.
So if you want to talk about where do people weigh in on this, is it that we shouldn't use plastic bags and put styrofoam in the recycling bins? Or is it about being in the street? Is it about being vocal, being noisy? Is it about re-electing people or electing people that will, in fact, make a commitment to making sure that there's an opportunity for addressing some of these issues? I mean, where does all this fall in the wide spectrum? I mean, power is based on how many, 100 and something communities of faith across southeastern Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
So
about
these
closing in
communities
on
of faith-
150. Mhm.
So you have these communities of faith who have come together, and what's the advocacy there? I mean, what are people doing? Are they writing letters? Are they educating themselves? Or that all of the above? I mean, where does power see itself powering, moving?
Well, I think power is constantly moving in the direction of renewable energy legislation. All of the above that you just named are actions that we employ. We encourage people to get involved on a monthly and bi-weekly basis. We have climate justice and jobs meetings for organizers, activists, stakeholders. Anybody is welcome to learn, to strategize on how we push the envelope towards renewable energy as fast as possible to save the planet. I think a mindset and some core values across the board. We should all kind of develop a new narrative and learn more about how do we, as a coalition, push renewable energy in the private and public sector. But the private sector, getting them to see renewable energy and environmental justice through a lens of not only profit, which we know is a mathematical formula of revenue minus expenses equals profit, but more so it's about people and planet, and having that triple bottom line lens around decision making as it pertains to business decisions and models, but also our core values on the public sector, just from the bottom up as a people. And all people can subscribe to these values of health and safety, affordability of our utilities and our bills that we pay at home, labor and getting labor involved in this discussion around renewable energy and what that looks like for their families and for all of our families, and renewable energy as those 4 core values. So our campaigns, whether it be a just transition for our public utility system with PGW, our fight with PICO and some of the other private sector funders of fossil fuels, we want them to reconsider those core values. We want people to get involved to remind them, particularly taxpayers, that our legislation works for us and that we need to vote and hold them accountable between the ballots, and then for our private sector to come aboard and make better business decisions based on a triple bottom line.
You know, one of the things that we've observed over the past few years, and it's going on now with voting rights legislation, or how to get rid of voting rights, the legislation in Georgia, Texas, Florida, is that legislation was written as model legislation funded by the Koch brothers and others, speaking of oil and fossil fuel. And that is then taken down to a very, very local level with money in lobbyist pockets that say, introduce this legislation here, it's for you, do it. And that's what happened over a number of years around redistricting, around voting rights. And is that a model that we should employ? Is that a model that should work for environmental justice activists, that we begin to develop model legislation and then, I don't know about the being able to line people's pockets with the lobbyist dollars, but it seems like to me you have to connect people to something that's real.
Marie, I think thankfully the New Jersey
there
has
to
provided.
be why.
I was just going to say the New Jersey environmental justice legislation, I think, is the national model. It hasn't been used yet, and we're all kind of waiting for it to be used. In
Do we have anybody who will look at it in terms of introducing an introduction in the state of Pennsylvania?
No.
Okay.
But we do have legislators who are allies to this, that are working. They're in the minority in the legislature rather, but they are working toward the same goals that we are. And we are, so Power, for example, is part of various alliances, climate tables that do respond to legislation and are trying to shape legislation or executive actions by the governor, such as Reggie.
Right.
I also wanted to just briefly go back for a moment to your point about which is most important, or the choices that we have. Someone put into the chat everything, and I want to emphasize that we get asked over and over again to prioritize, and
you
can't prioritize. These things are interconnected, and we have to push back when people ask us to prioritize. That they're missing the point.
Well, and the point that I think we tried to come to today that Russell, you talked about, and Shailene, you talked about as well, is the whole notion that whether it's voting rights or Black Lives Matter or gun legislation or building codes, it's all tied into an environmental justice discussion. So no, you can't, it's pretty hard to prioritize. You pick and choose what you think you can push forward. But it seems like to me that we also, and I heard this very loudly from Russell Hicks, we also have to somehow use some language that we all commonly connect to, that it makes a difference how we use certain words. You know, you start to talk about, you know, energy, you have to be able to be clear that there are, that moving from one kind of energy use to another is not going to make my life miserable. And how do we do that? How do we help people see that? Does it mean I'm going to lose my job? What about, you know, all of that I think has to be connected with the discussion. I know, Russell, you're working on a big issue in Chester. And I wondered if you had anything you wanted to share about environmental activism and what it's going to take there to impact. Is there a short and sweet to that discussion?
Oh, I don't think so. And it's a really crazy. I mean, the thing that's happening. So I mean, there's Chester is, you know, the world capital of environmental racism. And Maria, I was actually going to bring it up earlier because you were mentioning kind of like the, you know, the history, things we thought in 1970 or 1980 or 1990 change. So the whole spark of that, you know, cluster of pollution sources in Chester, you know, Chester has maybe the country's biggest waste incinerator next to a paper mill, next to a sewage and industrial waste incinerator, next to a casino, next to a prison, next to Boeing, and next to, you know, a poor Black community. And right now they're trying to privatize one of the large public entities down there. And it's really confusing because the situation is happening literally on 3 levels at the same time. It's the state DEP needs to transfer permits, the Public Utility Commission needs to approve the sale, and then the Delaware County Council also has to approve the sale. And none of these situations have been resolved yet. They're all independently up in the air. So Clean Air Council is working on a DEP comment to oppose the privatization of the Delcora sewage waste incinerator and industrial waste.
And this is the one
incinerator.
that's the biggest in the country?
No, that is the Covanta waste incinerator.
Okay.
Their air permit is up in September, so that's kind of a far off goal that I think a lot of people are organizing around, trying to get DEP to not renew that air pollution permit down there. But yeah, and I think to all of the issues that we're talking about, there is this really crazy push to privatize public utilities. This company, Aqua Pennsylvania, and then this other company, Pennsylvania Water. And there's lots of companies that do it, but they're buying public water utilities and then operating them as corporations. And it's just, you know, just so foolish. I can't think of one good reason why you would want a private company to treat your water for you. So yeah, it's something the Clean Air Council is definitely working on. The comment is due May 4th. But there's going to be a lot
of the public companies, if you live in Flint, Michigan, didn't do such a hot job either.
Oh, well, Decorah does a terrible job. Yeah. That's the whole situation. I mean, they can like that's the reason why all these public utilities want to sell themselves, is because they don't want to put the effort into properly running themselves. So rather than, you know, stepping it up, they're taking a step down. I mean, that's the crux of the whole situation, is that the public utilities aren't doing great. So they're looking at privatization as like the solution, but I think it's only going to get worse.
It just reminds me, I think we can add the US Post Office to an environmental justice discussion as well. Speaking of selling of public utilities and public services. I'm going to see if we can go to some questions, and I'm going to see if there are any questions that folks have or want to join, or comments that they want to make in terms of discussion. We've kind of ranged around, and we just really wanted to have a conversation that kind of introduces us to a lot of this, and just the notion that economic and social justice issues are not separate from environmental issues, and the interconnectedness of all of these issues, whether it's, you know, a president who actually says the word systemic racism, or understanding that some people have a much easier time getting a vaccination than others, and a lot of it depends on who you are and where you live, to whether or not you can go to any kind of community solar power that would make your life cleaner and your neighborhood cleaner, and whether or not your streets are really safe. So I would like to open it up. I think I can unmute people, but I'm not sure. I may have to ask one of our Venture Cafe, Angela, if you can.
Yeah, people can go ahead and unmute themselves if you want to ask a question, or you can
stick your hand up.
Chat.
Yeah, stick your hand up if you have a question. Okay, Sean, you were here very early in this discussion, so welcome.
Happy Earth Day, everybody. Thank you for the wonderful discussion. I did have a question. It sounds like there's a bit of red tape and gridlock currently in the Pennsylvania legislature as far as pushing environmental change. Where are some examples of some states where change is happening and there's less gridlock and red tape right now from an environmental perspective? And how can those best practices be replicated without overturning the legislature, if that's possible?
I'm not sure if that's possible, but Russell will take us to the cutting edge of that answer, I'm sure.
I mean, you know, New Jersey, New York, Delaware, Maryland, they're all right there. Everybody, and like, honestly, you know, those states are sort of, they use our electricity, you know. Russell Hicks mentioned the PJM grid, you know, that started as Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland. Now it's like 13 states, but they still just call it the PJM grid. So, you know, we do all this nasty stuff in Pennsylvania, burning fossil fuels, fracking. You know, fracking is banned in New York State, but they still take our gas. You know, New Jersey takes our electricity, even though they don't generate as much. You know, the state of Pennsylvania exports more electricity than any other state in the country. So, I mean, it's easier for those states to have those policies because they're letting Pennsylvania do all their dirty work. But yeah,
that was the basis for the comment that the state of Pennsylvania breathes the pollution and then sends it all to other places, but we get the pollution of having created all that electricity or oil or gas. Really, that gets not so much the oil but the gas, right?
Well, New York State is the first. It's you know, if you're looking for positive environmental things to look at, you know, the New Jersey EJ legislation is solid. They have a great renewable energy portfolio standard, and New York State became the first state in the country to regulate fracking waste as hazardous waste, a move that the federal EPA has neglected to do, and it's a really big issue in Pennsylvania right now, and it's the reason why I oppose the sale of that sewage incinerator owned by Delcora right now to this company Aqua, because Aqua's parent company is also a natural gas company. Aqua's parent company is Essential Utilities, which also owns People's Natural Gas. So we may be in a situation where a natural gas company owns our water if you live in Delaware County.
And Sean, the other thing I would just say on the front of the legislature is that really conscientious, careful organizing needs to be done at a very local, almost microcosm level, so that you get to know who is your state legislature, and this is what we want you to do. And you begin to, you begin to have citizen lobbyists that will take this legislation, will visit their offices, because guess what? They don't hear from people and voters very often. And it needs to go very, very local and very, very micro. And there needs to be some organizing around that. I think Power is doing some of that. Aren't you all visiting legislative offices?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And just to emphasize your point, the lobbyists who are being paid as full-time, this is their full-time job, they visit those, whether it's through Zoom or in person or some other virtual mechanism, they visit those legislators every day. It's hard for volunteer base to do that, or mostly volunteer base. So it's essential that everybody, as many people as we can get, are involved in campaigning, are involved in public hearings. The more people that show up, the more attention, well, the politicians take note of those counts. And so the more people that show up, the more they realize that this matters to the people.
Right. And they need to hear more voices. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, classic. If anybody's ever been to a zoning hearing, they literally count heads. How many people are for? How many people are against? And I'm talking about like 5 people compared to 2 people. Like it's like the level of engagement that we see a lot.
So
Yes,
Shailene, maybe we'll get to. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to add their power in numbers. So get involved, because our legislators, they vote, but we have to vote for them, and then stay on top of them between elections, again, at the local level, at zoning board meetings, at city council meetings, making our voices heard louder than the lobbyists, because they have the money and they are active every day, but they are power in numbers, particularly from a diverse population of voters. There's so much apathy in our local and state government that local officials feel disengaged to serve their constituency. And so the more people that gets involved with campaigns from the bottom up to vote, and also from the, doing the research, just really digging into following the money, because the public sector and private sector are married close together when we talk about the lobbyists. And so making sure that it's representative of stakeholders, which is all people and not just shareholders.
I'm gonna respond to a comment in the chat room in a minute, but let me just ask Wendy Greenspan, did you have a question you wanted to raise?
Well, I just wanted to amplify a little bit what has been talked about in the last couple of minutes about people getting involved and in protesting, in joining activist groups. There are so many people that I talk to that say, oh yes, I'm concerned about the environment. I, bring my canvas bag to the grocery store. I recycle, I drive a Prius. And then, and it stops there. That is not enough. If everybody carrying a canvas bag to the grocery store is not going to solve global warming, we have to get involved politically. And that's the most important thing. It's not the canvas bags, it's getting involved, voting, joining activist organizations.
And I guess just a comment, David Beckett, I really appreciated the comment that you made, that you're hearing more about politics from this discussion than about the innovation and the ecosystem and where does that go. And I guess one of the questions that I ask is, how do we make those connections because it's almost like one cannot happen without the other. Don't know if you wanted to make a comment about that, David, because it's like Russell Hicks is an entrepreneur who's trying to look at innovative kind of ways that the ecosystem can be supported and changed. And I know, Steve, you're working on a model with an economist about how to deal with food sustainability. So,
but I would like to comment on or at least respond to David about some of the innovations that are going on. Boston, for example, is looking at a new program for ground source heat pumps that would be provided by the gas company. This is consistent with their skill set, consistent with their overall model, but would not involve the delivery of gas to homes. It would involve the delivery of heat to home using electrification and the ground source heat pumps. It's a very innovative project that's going on. We are following it, and we are hoping that Philadelphia will at least do some sort of prototype around this. Secondly,
and Steve, let me just interject. And in order for that project to happen in Boston, what needed to happen in the social or infrastructure around that innovation to make it happen? It needed to be there, right?
Right. So the people that organized it were working with a company called, I believe it's EarthSource, who developed the technology. They worked with the union as well, the unions, so that there is a plan of action that actually addresses the core values that Russell Hicks mentioned earlier around health and safety, renewability, affordability, and fair labor. So they went at it in a very strategic and innovative way. But there's other innovations going on as well. And I just want to mention those as well. New Jersey and Delaware are investing in deep sea wind turbines. These have to be manufactured on a coastline or a river because the propellers are so large that you can't transport them over land. But they are very, it may be a very important clean method of producing energy certainly for the East Coast. Again, I think the New Jersey governor is committing $250 million into building that plant or the capacity to do that. So that's going to create new jobs in clean energy. And lastly, coming back to the heat exchange, I think we need to think about new business models. We come over and over again through this conversation. We've been discussing some of the shortcomings of an extractive capitalist system. We need to work with entrepreneurs to develop new models that flip the incentives so that the incentive is not extracting more from the earth, but providing services that people need, that value people and value their communities. And I think that's possible. And so one of the things that's being looked at for Philadelphia in the PGW diversification study is something called heat as a service. And I think that has potential to address that issue as well.
I also think it's important to note that if you look back historically at most of the innovations, both in drugs and healthcare and food and even products, a lot of those came from public policy and public dollar support. And I think that if we can figure out how to move our public consciousness to support more of that, it does make a difference. And unfortunately, it does come with that word called political, because it is quite political at this point as to how those dollars are spent. But
yeah, just to respond to the role of venture capitalists. And again, we try to frame on, capitalism as a profit-driven business model in terms of the private sector and their responsibility and role. And what we're saying, the difference between a traditional entrepreneur and a social entrepreneur is the triple bottom line, which considers in their mission and operations and business model, not only profit, but also the health of people in terms of quality of life, and then life on earth itself, because there's no money without an earth. So that's the bottom line. In all private sector, people can understand that. If we're going to have a just transition to renewable energy in our public utility sectors, there's tons of innovation and technology we can talk about. When we talk about the land and food, there's vertical farming. We talk about, hydroponics and growing food through water. We've already talked about some innovations in the solar sector using solar power. And that's, again, battery life technology, tons of technology that can be invested in. There's a role for the social capitalist who's just not all about profit. There's a role for the consumer. And also, yes, want to put this on the table, getting back to a demand-based economy and having that drive the supply instead of the lobbyists and the CEOs at the top of these corporations that are funding fossil fuels. So we can talk about technology. There's tons of innovation in science, but it should be followed, and the data should be used to make better quality of life on Earth for all people.
So we're almost at the end of our time, and somebody, I thought Margarita was here, had a question, did not have a question. So is there a final moment that we want to come to of whether or not we can celebrate Earth Day, or should we celebrate Earth Day but be sad that we still have to celebrate the notion of Earth Day? I'm not sure.
Oh, I think we can celebrate her.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I would say I do still feel like we definitely should, because even though we still have a lot of work to do, we still have made progress. Also, me as a young student, I did come to realize that there are also like a lot more younger students more invested into taking care of the earth or seeing a change in climate change and global warming and everything. So I do feel like there is possibly a better future for like the planet, because a lot of people that like try to make their voices heard by like political views so that we can actually get what we need. And yes, I do feel like we are coming up, like it's a long journey, but I do feel like we'll eventually be able to have more progress in order to fix the problem and try to reverse at least some of the damage done. So, yes.
Thank you. I'm gonna call it an afternoon there, and I'm gonna remember that we take away from this the lesson one more time, that we pause and say thank you to those who have been able to try to take care of the earth historically, and those who will take care of the earth moving forward. So thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of Earth Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you,
Thank you.
Steve and Russell and
Thank you.
Shylin. This was awesome. I'm so glad that you came out today to do this.
Yeah,
And
it was
this
great.
has
Thank
been
you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Get outside if you can. I'm pretty sure this time last year I was stuck in my house in lockdown.
That's right. So we're all still a little locked down, but through the innovation of Zoom, here we are. So have a wonderful day, everybody, and thank you. And
Take care, everybody.